Benjamin Dixon Show is only possible with listener support. Go to www.thebenjamindixonshow.com to register for our blog and join the Progressive Army.
Today is Wednesday, July 8th, 2020. Thanks so much for joining me. A good friend of mine just kind of mentioned in passing that my show is all doom and gloom now at this point. And we used to laugh. We used to have a good time on this show. It used to be, it was the good old days, you know, back when all we had to worry about was the presidential campaign. But life has a funny way of changing extremely quickly. Things are so different now. The things that we're facing are enraging. And, you know, as much as I want to laugh, there's literally nothing to laugh about. I'm specifically thinking about the full court press that's happening right now to push our children back into schools. When we are at the uptick, uptick doesn't even capture it. We're at a resurgence of COVID-19 cases. I mean, I think yesterday we had 60,000 new cases across the country. And then you have the reality of this system that is like so transparent in their desire to allow us to die on behalf of profits, on behalf of capitalism. I mean, when you have the systemic racism that continuously surrounds us in the midst of a pandemic. Police officers are willing to risk their lives to execute their version of white supremacy. I mean, they're literally out here wrestling with people. Their mask is falling out off their face because it's more important to them that they put their knee on the neck of somebody than it is their own personal safety. I mean, that's some goddamn commitment to your bigotry that you're putting your life at risk, but I digress. All these things added together, you know, the truth is, it is laughable. I'm going to be quite honest, right? The absurdity. Maybe if we just look at the ridiculousness of America, right? And just stop there, right? Because if you go beyond the ridiculousness, it turns into rage. But the ridiculousness of it is that now we're in month 4, going in month 5 of a pandemic. And just now that we're getting 60,000 people a day infected. Now the president of the United States, now Fox News, now his COVID-19 commission. Now they're saying, oh, let's wear a mask. What? Now you want to wear a mask after this virus has gotten so out of control? I'm glad you caught up with everybody. I'm glad you caught up with common sense. But then the absurd thing about it is there are guidelines that the CDC just put out for schools to quote unquote open back slowly and safely. But that's not good enough. The president of the United States is insisting that those guidelines are too difficult and too expensive to implement. And so we're going to have to do something else. So whereas the goal for the president is to reopen schools for any number of reasons that we broke down yesterday. The goal is to reopen schools. The CDC says, okay, if they can abide by these guidelines, they can reopen. Then the president, no. We need to open without those guidelines because those guidelines are too strenuous. That's the absurdity that we're living in. So they're literally pushing us into a situation where the worst case scenario, to be quite frank with you. This is what Donald Trump tweeted out. He said in Germany, Denmark, Norway, Sweden, and other major countries, schools are open with no problems. The Democrats think it would be bad for them politically if U.S. schools open before the November election, but it is important for the children and families. May cut off funding if not open, and that's the entire point. And besides all the rest of the ignorance that is inside of that tweet, never mind the fact that Germany, Denmark, and Norway and Sweden, they all took necessary precautions while Donald Trump was forwarding conspiracy theories. This is the absurdity of America. The absurdity of America. The point at which you can't laugh about it is the point at which you realize this is going to get people killed. The decisions of this administration, of this government, directly leads to someone's death. I don't know how many someone's. I don't know what percentage, but the decisions of this government directly is directly contributing to the deaths of its citizens. And when you think about it in that context, it all ceases. It not only ceases to be just absurd, right? The absurdity is something that we can mock. And a lot of people are good at that. There's a lot of mocking that's going on Twitter, on social media, parody videos. There's a whole lot of mocking because it is absurd and it is laughable. It's a level of stupidity that is laughable. But if you just pause for a minute and think about what's getting ready to happen, that somebody's family, a series of families, is going to be in mourning before Labor Day. Somebody's families, somebody's parents are going to contract it through asymptomatic children at their school. Asymptomatic children are going to pass it to another child who may still be asymptomatic, and everybody thinks everything is fine, but they gave it to the parents who are not asymptomatic. When you really think about how this plays out, and I guess perhaps that's my problem. My problem is I take everything to the logical conclusion and beyond. I take everything. It's just a habit. That's just what I do. I have to see. It's not that I have to. I just do see 3 or 4 steps ahead of everyone else in this political game. And the result of what Donald Trump and the Republican Party is doing across this country, and the result of the absence of any meaningful opposition from the Democratic Party, the outcome is more death, more sorrow for American families. I believe the reality is that we have entered into a new era in American history. Normal is not normal anymore. Normal is not anything that we remember. I think things have changed so significantly and are going to continue to change, and not necessarily for the better. And I guess if anything you get from this show, you can get a pretty solid look into what's coming. Not any kind of mysticism or prophecy or anything like that, but really just foresight. Just really plain and simple foresight and understanding how the pieces of the puzzle fit together and how the dominoes fall. And how the pieces of the puzzle fit together. This is an assault on our schools, on our education system as a whole. This is an assault on impoverished families. This is targeting the way that they are carrying out this COVID-19 response. The end result. I don't care if you want to say that this is not their intention. Their intentions don't matter. The end result is what matters. And the end result is targeting poor minority communities, poor Black communities, elderly Black communities. It's targeting us disproportionately because we are disproportionately affected by this virus. But if you just play this thing out to its logical conclusion, if teachers don't resist and don't strike and they return to school, then we are going to see a great deal of infections that are going to directly target teachers. It's going to directly hurt all the people who can't homeschool their children. This virus is coming home to them. And we're going to see it. We are literally just setting ourselves up for Let me pause. Here's the question. What do Republicans get out of this suffering? Could it be that they just sheerly just love the suffering? Because as Adam Silver says of the Nation, he says the cruelty is the point. Perhaps the point is to create as much chaos as they possibly can, because in that chaos, their political strategy can be executed. There's not financial gain in this, except for the fact that they can take money from public schools and siphon it off to private schools and to charter schools. So perhaps there is a financial incentive in terms of this schooling strategy. But in terms of the overall strategy, what is the political win in overseeing the deaths of 200,000, 300,000 Americans? I'm not sure what their political win is, but I have asked that question on Twitter and got so many responses and a lot of different theories. But at the end of the day, I think the most important thing for us to realize is that we cannot depend on this government for anything. We cannot depend on this government for anything. Now, how we put this government in check is a different conversation and a complicated conversation that requires some development, some organizing, some development, and some technology. We'll get to that. But the first thing that people have to realize is that not only can we not depend on this government for anything, we cannot depend on this government to do the right thing, even to preserve itself. This government is making all of the necessary decisions that to undermine its validity, to undermine its support. They are pushing the envelope. I honestly don't see any other way of looking at this. The powerful in this country, they are pushing the envelope to see exactly how far they can get without doing anything for the American people. Not only that, but putting the lives of Americans at risk in order to ensure that this system continues to churn out profits. And because of that, the inevitable response at some point, if we continue down the path that we currently are on, there will be a violent resistance to this government because the government is not giving the people any choice. I'm not sitting here saying that I'm going to organize a revolution. What I am saying is that the inevitable outcome, if you play this out to its logical conclusion, you can only push people so far. So I just don't know. This is just where we are in America. This is what society is right now. Everyone is scrambling, trying to figure out how they can live without risking death. The majority of people in this country right now are trying to figure out how they can pay their bills and feed their children without exposing themselves to this virus. And instead of the government doing what's necessary to help the people solve that equation, the government is throwing in all of these ridiculous variables, making everything uncertain and driving the risk that people are facing. This is an occasion where, you know what it is? I know what they get. This is what Republicans get. The Republicans ultimately get to prove their theory about the uselessness of government by being the government that is useless. And while they do that, they are useless to the people. Not only useless, but they are exacerbating our situation. As they exacerbate our situation and prove their ideological point that this government is useless, they are extremely useful to the private sector. That's all this is. This is just a continuation of the conservative ideology that big government is the problem. Not just big government, government in general. And so they would love for this government to crumble down to nothing more than a military and a police state to keep people in check domestically and keep the world in check globally. But they are using this as an opportunity to show exactly how destructive the government can be when you have it led by sociopaths in one party and feckless, incompetent morons in another party. Point taken. Got it. The government is failed. The American government has failed. It is not only a failed government, the government itself is a threat to the safety of the people, so long as it is underneath a regime that in one party is a death cult that is pushing people into a pandemic to have to make the choice between feeding their kids and risking their lives. And the other party is missing in action. And when they are on the scene, they don't know what the hell they're doing. And they're completely feckless and incompetent at providing the necessary opposition in this moment when we need it the most. backdrop to all this madness is the fact that nearly 21 million Americans are facing eviction for some combination of reasons, including being laid off for COVID-19, a rollback in their hours, not enough hours to work, the complete inability to work because of COVID-19, right? And not to mention just the staggering cost of living in the United States in general, for which many people face evictions on a regular basis. There have been so many underlying problems in this country that COVID-19 is just exacerbating. And on the backdrop of all this stupidity and ignorance that's happening and the malevolence that's happening from this country, we have to remember that 21 million people are facing evictions, and they have begun. And yet the government does nothing. Nothing. Not a damn thing to help the people. And they have completely abdicated any responsibility to the welfare of the people. That's fascinating to me, simply because it's telling us, the government is telling us that it wants nothing to do with us except for what it can take from us. I know we talked about this yesterday, but I hate to sound like a broken record, but I can't put too fine of a point to it. The government says it is expressing that it wants nothing to do with us except for what it can take from us. And any response to this can't be haphazard or half-assed, because it's bound to fail. The fact that there are so many people spread out across this country with different ideologies, different belief systems, so many different ways that we could be divided, gives the government its power and its ability to continuously to do whatever the hell it wants to do, despite the damage that it causes the people. But I think we can have one, and then we can't even agree. We're almost at the point where we can't even agree on death. We can't agree on the fact that people are even dying from COVID-19. Now, I know is that there's always going to be the intentionally obtuse who would revel in the propaganda in order to prove their pathetic political points, right? Their cheap political points and posturing. But the fact of the matter is that that type of thinking has itself become an impediment to progress against a government that has shown that it wants nothing to do with us except for what it can take from us. And it is counting on those divisions. It's counting on all the things that we latch hold to that gives us a sense of purpose in the moment, right? Some of these fights that people fight online, I mean, it really does give you the sense of satisfaction, the sense of accomplishment, the sense of purpose, right? All of these fights that we engage in on a regular basis, it really makes you feel like you've done something. Meanwhile, 21 million Americans are getting ready to be evicted. Meanwhile, the federal government is enacting policies as well as mandates and all-out propaganda campaign to engage in activities that will possibly get you killed. So all the things that we fight for, fight against, and fight with each other over, at the end of the day, it should feel pretty empty, because we're no longer dealing with just an irresponsible government. Those are the things that we could argue about. We could afford to argue about all of those differences when we just had an irresponsible government. Right? A government that was more concerned about billionaires than the people. We could probably get away with it. We shouldn't have. We should have been organizing the entire time. But if you're going to just kind of argue over who canceled who, then, the time to have done that would be when the government wasn't actively doing things that could get you killed. Right? Like, the government is actively doing things that are going to get people killed, and we are still so fixated over the minutia. And I get it. It's hard to not engage in it, and I'm not trying to tell you what to do and not engage in that kind of stuff, but I'm just talking about the emptiness that I feel when I'm engaged in any other conversation than the threat that this government poses to the people. To me, it feels like nothing else matters right now. because the government is actively doing things that are going to get people killed. And if we're not careful, it could be one of us. It could be one of you. It could be someone we love. And we shouldn't have to wait until that happens to take this seriously. And what happens is it is so easy for your individual despair to be dismissed because you're just one in 327 million people. And so the rage, the outrage that you would feel if something happened to you is so easily absorbed by this monstrous system. This system where now so many people are mourning. And so even if you wait until something happens to one of your family members to finally take this seriously, the problem is that we are so isolated. We're in so many different silos. We're not unified to the point where your pain can resonate through the entire system and we all act because of your pain. Because if we had the ability to do that, then we would have the ability to confront this government head on. And no, I'm not talking about pulling up with guns because that's a fight that we cannot win. We can't. But I am talking about utilizing the power that we have as a collective body to resist this government, both parties. I would not have to talk like this if we had an effective opposition. What I would be able to do instead would be able to cheer on the opposition. But the opposition is not there. Who with a significant political platform is pulling out all the stops to stop this government from forcing people to go back to school when we know that schools are already petri dishes of viruses? When we know that they're shutting down bars, they're shutting down restaurants in the very cities that they're now trying to send children back to school in. I would be able to champion our champions if we had any. But instead, we have been left out here all alone for us to figure this out on our own. And that's easier said than done. But damn it, we're going to do it. We have to. At this stage in everything that's happening, I think it is important for everyone to understand what's happening. I do believe that it is important for us to be preparing and planning and organizing. And in terms of organizing, it's also important that we're not recreating the wheel, that we're not creating new organizations that replicate what other organizations do. We waste a lot of time and money doing that. And so I've been careful not to make suggestions in terms of specific organizations or things that we can or should do until I'm confident in the move. Until I'm confident in that next move, I don't want to just throw ideas out here and get people to rally behind this, and then that doesn't work, and then rally behind that, and then that doesn't work. And it has nothing to do with fear of launching. It has everything to do with respect for the severity of the moment. We can't miss. We can't afford to have a bunch of startups and fails, startup and fail. Oh, I gave it my best and wasted all this time and wasted. No, we don't have that luxury. When we hit this, we got to hit it right. And so until that is fleshed out, and listen, I'm all ears if you have suggestions as well. Like, my DMs are generally open. They're generally flooded, but at least they're open on Twitter. But the thing that I think is most critical as we do preparation behind the scene is that everyone clearly understands the justification for whatever we do. The justification for us revoking the consent of the governed. Like, even if it's just rhetorically, Like, I don't expect, I mean, what does it mean to reject the consent of the governed, to revoke our consent to be governed by this system? It is a statement of liberation more than anything else, right? It's not that the government no longer has power over us, because the government will certainly have power over us, but it's a statement of liberation in your mind to understand that this government is not doing the things that it is supposed to do to justify everything that it takes from us. It clearly is not. And that case has to be made in the minds of enough people to hit critical mass to do what's necessary to provide for ourselves. Ultimately, a real revolution in this juncture would just be a mechanism for us to provide for ourselves in these times. That's a real revolution, because we will be providing for the people what we need for ourselves in the absence of a government that continues to drain from us and do nothing for us. What is the government doing for us? Absolutely nothing, except for worsening our conditions and enriching the rich.
Go to www.patreon.com/The BPD Show and get twice the content and unfiltered interviews without any of the commercial interruptions.
And here we go. At this point in every single episode, I like to take a minute to thank the people who make the show possible, our patrons. Very special welcome to So What? Thank you for becoming a patron. Patrick McBain, thank you for becoming a patron. Struma, thank you for becoming a patron. Yep, everybody just bop your head. Mick White, thank you for becoming a patron. Noah Cooper Ryder, thank you for becoming a patron. David Talarico, or David T, thank you for becoming a patron. You too can become a part of this prestigious and prodigious patron family by going to patreon.com/The BPD Show, where you get twice the content, uncut, unfiltered interviews, none of the commercial interruptions, and guess what? You give me the ability to speak power to the powerless, whether the powerful like it or not.
Welcome back to The Benjamin Dixon Show. Visit us online at thebenjamindixonshow.com.
Yeah. Okay. So last thing before we go to the patrons episode, just some things that we talk about in the patrons community, and the reason I talk about it there and not here is because the patrons have generally given me a license to mess up and not say things correctly. I'm literally thinking out. Well, okay, so I think out loud on both episodes. Like, this episode is a stream of consciousness, just like the patrons episode. But on the patrons episode, I rarely, if ever, edit and go back and fix. I just talk to the patrons, and sometimes I get it wrong, and sometimes I get it just as right as I do here publicly. And the only reason I'm mentioning that is because that space gives me the freedom of saying things that are not prepared to be said publicly. It's not that they're controversial at all. To give you an example, I do discuss with the patrons the solutions or what could lead to solutions. And I'm not saying this here to encourage you to become a patron. I'm saying it here because the most recent conversation that we're having over there is something along the lines of developing a team of developers who have the philosophical leaning and the intention of using software to liberate people. I'm not going to give you the person's name who gave me this quote until he gives me permission to, but a friend of mine said it like this. He said, "The future is software. Software is political, and so we have to get ahead of it." And so recently we've been talking extensively, and I'm going to talk more about it today, the fact that we're not only are we not ahead of it, but in terms of programming used for liberation, I feel like we're significantly behind the eight ball. And everything that we discussed, everything that we do in the future, the revolution is going to be programmed. The revolution is going to be coded. And I'm sorry I started the conversation and there's my music, but I don't want you to think that we're not talking about solutions. We're just making sure that we have it all fleshed out. Patrons, stay tuned.
The Benjamin Dixon Show is only possible with listener support. Go to www.patreon.com/The BPD Show and support The Benjamin Dixon Show. If you like this episode, be sure to share, like, and subscribe.